Okay, today I'm going to give a quick demo about how to use the Storyteller Visual Studio Code extension to make playbacks like you can find on the Playback Press. Now the first step is to install the extension. So with Visual Studio Code open, go to the Extension tab and search for the plugin called Storyteller. After you find it, click the Install button. Next, I'll talk about how to start using Storyteller to record your development sessions. So you must open a folder using Visual Studio Code to start tracking the changes in it. And only the changes in that directory will be recorded. So I have a completely empty folder called Code somewhere here on my file system, and I'm going to use VS Code to open it. Now, after you open a folder, you can start tracking by clicking the button Start Storyteller down at the bottom. You'll be prompted for your name and email because every change will be attributed to one or more developers. So if you're pair programming or mob programming, you can add multiple developers to the current developer group using the command palette, which I'll show in a moment. Now, once you start Storyteller, a new hidden folder is created in the root of the folder that you opened called .storyteller. And this folder contains all of the data for the session, all the keystrokes and file operations, all the media files. Now, you're never going to work with these files directly, so for the most part, you can ignore this folder from here on out. And this is similar to the hidden.git folder if you're familiar with the Git version control system. Later on, if you change your mind and you decide you don't want to use Storyteller for this code, then all you have to do is remove this .storyteller folder and the code is not going to be affected. Okay, next you write and run code just like normal. You can add new files and directories, you can delete, rename, and move files and directories as well. So here I'm going to write a simple program. When you're ready to describe the changes in your code, you'll start a new playback, which happens in a browser window, not VS Code. Now the plugin acts as a mini web server, so you can go back and forth between the editor and the browser to build the playback. So you start a playback by hitting the Start Playback button down at the bottom of the screen. Okay, this will create a web page with the entire history of the development process over one or more programming sessions. So you can use the play pause button to replay the entire session. I'll do that now. Okay, these are all the changes in exactly the order that I typed them. You can also use the slider to control the playback. You can also use the left and right arrow keys on the keyboard to go through the events one at a time for the most precision. So you can't see me doing this, but I am using the arrow keys now to move the playback forward. Every playback has a title, and you can edit this at any time at the top of the window. Comments describe the interesting parts of a program. You can add one or more comments at any paused point in a playback. Now, comments usually have some highlighted code and a text description of the code in the highlights. But a comment can also have an image, a video, a multiple choice question, or a tag. The first comment usually provides an overview and describes what the viewer is about to see. So next I'll add a brief description here and save. So I've moved forward to the first interesting point in the playback, and I'll create a new comment by clicking on the button on the bottom of the page. Now there are two comments. Clicking on the comments is how a viewer can drive the playback. You can highlight multiple lines or multiple different selections. And here I'm choosing to add a secondary highlight around the selected code. Now these secondary highlights help the user know how much code they should be looking at, but they're also used in what I call blog mode for small screens. And this is a more traditional view of a code tutorial. So to go to blog mode, you go up in the right-hand corner and click that icon. And you can see the secondary highlights, if there are any, define what shows up in the code. By default, on a small screen, a playback will show up in blog mode. Here's another comment. This time though, I'll add an image to it. You can select an image from the file system, or if you have an image on your clipboard, you can just paste it in. Now I like to draw whiteboard style drawings and add them to the comments to help the viewer see what the code is actually doing. This time though, I'll just add a couple pictures of my cats. An image tag is automatically added to every comment with an image. And tags are used to filter comments. So if you only want to see the comments with an image, you can click on the tag. You can add other media like videos and audio files to a comment as well. Sometimes I'll add talking head videos of myself explaining the code in the comments. You can also add multiple choice questions to a comment to keep the viewer engaged. And the question is automatically tagged in the comment as well. Okay, now a viewer can click on the comments, they can filter by tag, or search for some highlighted code or comment text. Next, I'll discuss how to create a playback for distribution. Now this happens back in Visual Studio Code, so I'm going to switch back there, and I'm going to use the command palette to select this option, which is either Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P. So the tool will create a static website that displays all of the code and comments and place it all in a zip file that can be downloaded. Okay. So I save this zip file to my file system. If I unzip it, that's going to create a brand new folder. And inside this folder, there's going to be a file called index.html. Now, if you double click on this file, this is just a standard HTML file, but it has the entire playback with all the media files and project history. Okay, you can put this directory on any web server or send the zip file to another person to share your code playbacks. And this is how I add playbacks to the Playback Press site. Now, all VS Code extensions allow you to add elements to the command palette, which again is either Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P. All command palette options from this extension start with the word Storyteller. So I can filter those commands right in Visual Studio Code. So in addition to creating a playback for distribution, you can also start and stop the plugin. You can add and remove developers to the current developer group, and a few other things. Next, I'll show some more advanced features. Okay, sometimes you want to make a playback with a folder that already has some existing code in it. Now you can do this with Storyteller, and it will only track the new changes. So I'm going to start by closing the folder in Visual Studio Code that I was just working on, and closing a folder that essentially stops Storyteller. And then I'm going to delete the hidden .storyteller folder. Okay, so the file main.cpp still exists in the code folder, but that hidden .storyteller folder got removed. Now I'm going to go back and reopen that code folder. Okay, now that Storyteller folder has been removed, this is just a plain old folder with one file in it. Next, I'm going to restart Storyteller. All the existing files and their contents will be added as a group at startup. So let me make a few changes to the code. The playback will only include the changes since you started the plugin. So if you only want to show a small change in an existing program, you can add the initial code to a directory and then start the tool. Sometimes you want to ignore certain files and folders in a playback. You can add a special file called stignore.json to the top level project folder and specify what should be ignored. So let me create a new project. Next, you can see that there are 3 entries in this JSON file. You can specify certain file extensions to ignore, specific files, or whole directories to ignore all the changes within. I'm going to add an entry to ignore a file called name.txt. Okay, so you must restart Storyteller for this change to take effect. So I'm going to close the folder and then reopen that folder. Now I'm going to create a new file called name.txt. I'll go back to my main file. And I'll start a playback. And what you'll see is the playback does not show any of the changes made to name.txt. Just a note, the tool looks at the stignore.json file on startup only. So if you edit this file, you must restart the plugin. You might wonder what happens if some changes are made when Storyteller is not active. So let me show you how this works. I'll start with the same program as before. Okay, next I'm going to close the folder using Visual Studio Code, which again essentially shuts down Storyteller. Now, using a different text editor, I'm going to make some changes to main.cpp. I'll remove one line and then make a few changes to some other lines. Okay, using this alternate editor, I'm going to save, and then I'm going to close the editor. Now I'll restart Storyteller and it will notice that the file has been changed. And it's going to ask me if I want to add the new changes to the history of the project. If I say yes, the changes are added to the history of the playback. If I say no, the files will go back to the state when Storyteller was last active. In other words, all those changes outside of the tool will be ignored. Sometimes you want to hide embarrassing changes from your viewers. Now, as long as you don't add a comment while the code is on the screen, you can have any embarrassing changes permanently removed from the playback history. And this should give you the confidence to experiment while writing your code playbacks, knowing that you can get rid of the mistakes later. So I'm going to simulate making some mistakes in a new file. Now, in my experience, viewers don't focus on the code in between the comments. But getting rid of that code should give you some comfort that your embarrassing mistakes won't be a permanent part of the playback history. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a few comments that surround that time period I want to remove. Okay, next I'm going to go back to the editor and ask the tool to ignore anything that was added and then deleted in between any 2 comments. And that should get rid of the embarrassing mistake. I'll start by previewing this playback with that history removed. And once I'm sure I like the results, I can permanently remove those changes. So here's the playback without the embarrassing mistakes. Okay, so that's my quick overview of how to make a code playback. Thanks for watching.